Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen, to What If Deku Had His Balls Stolen? Nah, I'm totally kidding, but today we are giving Deku Turbo Granny's powers, which is gonna make for a pretty interesting story because when you start to think about the scaling from Dandadan to actual My Hero, things get a little funny, which is gonna be making for a hilarious video with a couple of really cool scenes and a bit of an anticlimactic ending. So if you guys are excited for that, then slap a like button on this video because the like goal for today's video is gonna be 1,000 likes. And if you guys can smash that, then I'll see if I can drop another Dandadan video for you guys. So with that being said, good luck and enjoy. Alright, before we begin this video, I have a slight confession to make, and that is that I don't really fully understand how Okarun's powers work just because I've only seen season 1 as well as episode 1 of season 2, you know, since that's all that's out right now, and I haven't exactly read the manga because if I'm being honest, a part of me kind of wants to get the manga like in hardcover forms, that way I could just binge through the whole series whenever I have a day off or something like that. I don't know, but we'll see about that. Anyways though, that said, I don't really understand how Okarun's powers fully function entirely. I know he has his Turbo Granny mode, and I know most of what happens in season 1. Oh, and one more thing I should definitely explain is that Deku in this timeline is not necessarily going to be having Turbo Granny be the caveat for him getting his powers. I thought maybe I should probably introduce yokai and aliens into this story, but things just got really complicated and I was just like, I don't know. And also, I didn't really plan this story ahead too much just because like I got some really cool art for this video by a fan and I decided that I just had to make this video. I mean, look at the thumbnail, bro. It's absolutely insane. So shout out to you, Nah. But yeah, anyways. When I started looking into Okarun's powers, and I pretty much just did a quick YouTube search of like, hey, like what are Okarun's powers? I ended up realizing that, yeah, the dude is pretty strong for his verse, but once we get into the territory of like My Hero Academia, where All Might can literally, he's been stated to move at like Mach 6 or something like that, Turbo Granny's speed is kind of a laughing matter when you compare it to All Might. So it doesn't even equate to the same powers in this story, which is kind of funny because we're going to be undergoing a story where Deku's not this busted, overpowered main character. Instead, he's literally going to be just another side character, and if anything, Bakugo himself might even be stronger than Deku, which is going to be hilarious, but honestly, I don't mind it because it's a breath of fresh air, and maybe I'll end up giving Deku one for all to make him like way more OP, but for now, we're going to start him off with the same powers that Okarun has in his timeline. So let's begin. We begin our story by establishing that Deku's still going to be Inko's son, and when he would make his visit to the quirk doctor in this timeline, some things would change, because even though Deku doesn't exactly have a quirk to this point yet, the doctor would tell Inko that there is still a chance Izuku could be a late bloomer, going on to explain that for some people, their quirks simply don't develop until a later age until their body is ready to handle it, because otherwise it would destroy their bodies, and thanks to the way that the quirks evolved, it has pretty much made it so that Izuku might have the potential to have that. But he would also warn her that there does exist the possibility that her son could straight up just be quirkless. After hearing the realization that he's not entirely quirkless and there's hope, Izuku wouldn't give up on his dream, just riding on that idea that he isn't quirkless. He has something. He just hasn't gotten it yet. Yeah, that's it. Think about kind of like Invincible, where he like wanted to get powers so badly until he finally did. That's kind of the situation Izuku finds himself in. So with that being the case, Deku would go back to school, and this is when Izuku's life would sort of start lining up with how it does in the original. Izuku would start getting bullied and ostracized by Bakugo, who believes that they're no longer on the same tier echelon, and he would start trying to push Izuku away via bullying him to kind of hide from the fact of his real emotions and stuff like that. We're going to be going with the same explanation the anime gives in season 7. So yeah, with that being said, Izuku now finds himself at school kind of being ostracized just because people are afraid of Bakugo, and they're like, well, if I hang out with Izuku, then by sheer like just hanging out with him, people are going to be like, oh, he's a weirdo too. So people would kind of start avoiding Deku like the plague, and it's kind of cool because Okarun also had like no friends, and even though I don't think he got bullied per se, he was kind of just like an outcast. He was in the background and no one really noticed him. The only time that Izuku would particularly stand out would be whenever Bakugo was bullying him, or if you had the displeasure of having him work on your group project. That's really the only times that Izuku would be, you know, kind of crazy. Oh, and also I figure why not give Izuku the same obsession with aliens and stuff like that we would have like a, you know, Okarun have in the actual Dandadan story. Which, speaking of Dandadan, I just have to say this. That first episode it it was strange, right? As I was watching what was happening, I was like, hey, yo, like, am I really watching this? And like, as I was watching everything take place, I was like, nah, bro, like, this is not okay. My little sister's seen this. But then I pushed past the first episode, kind of skimmed through that section, and then everything kind of started being cool. It's interesting because you kind of have to sit through that section. And even though it has that weird part that kind of makes me be like, I don't know, I like Dawn to Dawn despite the fact that weird stuff happens in the beginning. Oh, and Okarun's powers, how he gets his little dong stolen as well as his balls, it is hilariously funny. So I love the story and I can't wait to see what happens in the future. But that's besides the point. I'm getting off topic way too much in this video. Sorry about that. So cutting back into the story, we're kind of going to be seeing Deku grow up until he would eventually find himself in his final year of middle school, on the same day that the sludge villain incident happens, funny enough. I think it'd be pretty interesting for him to awaken his powers inside of the sludge villain, just because I think it might be for like a sick little like a scene to happen. So let's go with that. As Izuku would finish his day off and he was kind of in the back of the class, no one really noticed him. Izuku would develop more of this like quiet loner personality in this timeline, as the teachers would hand out the papers for the career aptitude tests and would start talking about how everybody wants to become heroes. This is when he would unfortunately single out Midoriya as somebody who also wanted to attend UA. This would lead Izuku to starting to get bullied and berated by Bakugo, and by the time that the class would end, he would make his way towards Izuku, going on to pretty much bully him and tell him that he's nothing, that he's not going to be making it into UA, and that he should just quit now. As we would watch Izuku in this timeline not even look at Bakugo with anger, but just kind of staring down saying, Bakugo, can I have my notebook back? This is when we would see Bakugo smirking, blowing it up and throwing it outside, to which Izuku, looking at him, would wonder why he's always been so mean to him, just choosing to keep his head down and walk past him. Bakugo would stare at him and say, wow, what a shame. You want to be a hero and you don't even have balls? That's so lame of you. I don't know why I was worried about you taking the exam. It's not like you're gonna pass or anything. As we would then cut to Izuku outside by the little pond thing, picking his notebook up and just thinking, no, Bakugo, I didn't stand up to you because I can't, but it's because there's no hope. What am I supposed to do? Quirkless Izuku. Izuku at this point would find himself in a stage of life where after waiting and waiting and waiting, he would have eventually fallen into despair and understood that, yeah, I'm probably not going to get a quirk. As we would see Izuku making his way through the tunnel, trying to fake a smile, but he just couldn't. It's at this point that a gigantic sludge creature would come from behind him, and Izuku seeing this thing come at him, he would feel scared, and as he would be about to run, his body just shuts down on him. He'd be consumed by the sludge villain as he would think, what's the point? I might as well just die. That way maybe if I reincarnate, I could be born with a quirk in my next life. He'd close his eyes, accepting his fate. But this is when all of a sudden, his hair color would change, going from its usual green color to white with red tips, and also having a red marking all over his face, his eye colors changing, and even his outfit shifting. In this moment, Izuku would feel a surge of power he'd never felt before, and as All Might was about to throw a crazy punch to the direction of the sludge villain, we would see Izuku start to fight for his life, trying to claw his way out, but unfortunately, his quirk just genuinely wasn't made to defeat the sludge villain. And only running at a max speed of like 65 miles per hour or 100 kilometers, there was just no way that Izuku's speed was going to outdo the sludge. So with All Might coming in to rescue Izuku, Izuku would be freed from the sludge villain. On the ground, as he would begin coughing and staring up at All Might, Izuku would stare at him saying, "Hey, number one." This is when we would see All Might looking at Izuku and realizing that he must have his quirk active. He would tell the young man if he could help him out with covering the sludge villain, and Izuku would do just that, at incredible speeds that Izuku's never felt before. All Might would question the young man on what his quirk was, and Izuku would stare at him saying, "Oh, this? Honestly, I don't know, All Might. This is the first time that I awaken this power. I think it has something to do with my body fighting back death." As All Might would stare back at the nonchalant Izuku before suddenly he would fall to his knees and start coughing. It's at this point that All Might, looking at him, would be about to jump off, but he's like, "Hey kid, are you okay?" As smoke starts coming out of his mouth, and suddenly, poof, All Might would revert to his Small Might form, with Izuku on the ground about to pass out. This would lead All Might to taking him back to a hospital where Izuku would be treated and his parents would be called. All Might never having shown Izuku his Small Might form, and Izuku remembering everything including his encounter with All Might as a blur. But if there was one thing he could remember, it was the fact that he awakened powers. Izuku at doing this would be like, "Mom, I think I got my quirk," and her realizing that her son had just woken up spontaneously and that's the first thing she says, she would leap on him going, "My baby!" To this point, Izuku would stare at his mother going, "Mom, I think I awakened my quirk." He tried pushing and doing everything and anything that he can to tap into it, but upon realizing that he couldn't exactly do too much, Izuku would kind of give up on this endeavor. This is when Izuku would remember he met All Might, and he would go on to pretty much check his notebook as it would be signed by All Might himself. The dude would start breaking out into tears thinking, "I awakened my quirk on the same day I met All Might, just my luck." He would start smiling and he would look at his mom before saying, "Mom, with a quirk I can become a hero. The doctor was right. I was just a late bloomer." She would look at him with a saddened expression, hoping that her son wasn't lying about awakening a quirk. As Izuku from this day forth, knowing that he wasn't lying, something genuinely awakened back there. He would start working out every day, thinking that maybe the reason that his body wasn't able to use his quirk was because he wasn't strong enough. I mean, look at himself. He's scrawny, he's weak, and he has no musculature. Izuku would start training about as hard as he would in the original timeline, and about 4 months into training, Izuku would find that he's able to tap into his Turbo Granny mode, or what the quirk doctors have named Turbo Mode. Izuku, after activating into this, would find out that at his current state, he could only tap into this power 2 times tops, because any more than that would just wreck his body. After all, using the power even for short bursts of time does definitely take its toll on him. So Izuku realizing this at about the 5-point mark would mean that he has an entire 5 more months to strengthen his body as much as possible to potentially be able to use this power at least 6 times a day. And luckily for Izuku, he would have actually short estimated just by 1 time, because now Izuku's body was more than strong enough to handle 7 times a day, which were small increments, but they're increments nonetheless. And with this newfound motivation, I could see him actually getting even more buff than the Izuku that we get in the original, just due to the fact that now Izuku's not working to hone a quirk that's not his, but to work on something that is his, and something that he had literally given up hope on. Now Izuku has newfound vigor and a reason to live, and every single second of Izuku's day that isn't spent at school is spent doing some sort of fighting training, working out, or meal prepping, which would do wonders for Izuku because unintentionally, the guy would actually start slowly looks maxing, which is kind of hilarious to say, but it is what's happening. So with that being said, eventually the day would come where the 10 months would be over, and Izuku would now find himself at the front steps of UA, looking at his future hero academy. Izuku would step forward in this moment as suddenly he would trip, and he would be caught by a girl named Uraraka who would have used her gravity quirk on him. Izuku mid-fall would have been thinking, "Damn, it was all for nothing," as Uraraka picking up would say, "Hey, sorry I used my quirk on you, but I figured it was bad luck to just let you fall on the first day, right? Isn't it nerve-wracking? Our whole future is going to be decided by this one test." Izuku not able to say anything just because of the fact that he's kind of not been having any human interactions practically since he started training for his quirk, would kind of remain silent until he's like, "Yeah, you're totally right. Honestly, I'm so scared, but a part of me's so pumped for this. I can't wait to show off the fruits of my training. I've been working so hard on the quirk I just unlocked recently." She's like, "What, recently?" And Izuku just keeps on yapping. He's like, "Yeah, it's a really cool quirk." Like, he keeps telling her stuff, and she's just like, "Right, well, hopefully you pass." And Izuku would look at her and say, "Ditto," as he walks over towards his section, and he would begin taking his test. He would sit down next to Bakugo, who would try to intimidate him like usual, but Bakugo would notice that Izuku's significantly bulked up and looks a lot different. He would stare at him and just go, "Well, it doesn't matter if the guy's been working out, because he doesn't have a quirk." So, completely ignoring Izuku, he would think that it was all wasted in vain, but at least the guy isn't so scrawny anymore, as we would then get the 0-pointer, 3-pointer, 2-pointer, and 1-pointer being explained before everybody would be sent outside, all ready to participate in the robot portion of the exam. Which, funny enough, is where we're going to be getting our first section of power scaling, I guess you could say. Because after looking into it and doing like a simple Google search, I ended up realizing that Izuku's top speed speed is about 62 miles per hour, which in human terms is definitely very quick, but once we start scaling that to MHA, where we have characters like Ida who have engine quirks who aren't even the greatest thing in the world, even somebody like him can move at about, I think it was 36 miles per hour, which is really close to what Izuku can do, which kind of makes Izuku look a little bit weak, but it is what it is. And once we start comparing Ida's speed or his top speed to more of the later seasons where the dude can really get moving, Izuku's top speed of 62 miles per hour practically becomes nullified by the end of the series. So I'm definitely going to be needing to kind of upscale Izuku and have him get stronger through training or something of the sorts. I'm probably going to end up having him and Ida like compete with each other like as rivals just because they're both like the speed type heroes, which is going to make for a pretty cool dynamic between the two of them. So as the test would be about to begin, Izuku would notice Uraraka at the front of the pack as he would walk over towards her direction and be about to pretty much encourage her and tell her good luck, but Ida stepping in the way would pretty much end up saying to get out of the way and like not to bother other people, that's not very sportsmanlike. And as Izuku would be yapping, you would suddenly hear President Mike saying, "Go, go, go!" As soon as everybody would hear that, people would start lunging towards the direction of the front, with Izuku realizing that he was in the back. This is when suddenly Izuku would close his eyes before his turbo powers would activate, and he would lunge in front of every single person with a massive leap, getting in front of the entirety of the class. Ida noticing that Izuku had even passed him, he would think, "What? What kind of quirk does that boy have?" As Izuku would lunge towards the first robot there before ramming his head straight through it, blowing it up. Then, Izuku continuing to run towards the direction of more robots, he would begin to clench his fist, reeling it back and throwing a super powered punch to the direction of it, blowing that one up as well. Izuku would go on to rack up a ton of robot points, but not like an insane amount. Let's say maybe like 12 more points than what Ida would have gotten in the original, just due to the fact that Izuku still hasn't had proper combat experience, and so even though he has the possibility of taking them all down, at first he was kind of shy about it and didn't really know how to do it, but once he got going, he definitely did get going. So regardless, he'd get about that many points when it comes to the entirety of the exam, and eventually Izuku hearing the 0-pointer off in the distance and seeing that there was a young girl about to be crushed by it, him not being able to just ignore Uraraka, unlike in the original timeline where he would leap up into the air and just shatter the 0-pointer, we would actually get a scene which is much different, with Izuku turning on the jets and breaking past his usual speed, which is normally about 65 miles an hour. This would lead Deku to tapping into way more speed, going on a solid 73 miles per hour as he would speed blitz, his first step instantly turning on the jets, and as he would grab Uraraka by the arm and rush right past the 0-pointer. It would stomp down with the proctors and everybody watching forward, wondering if they're gonna, even be alright. But it's at this point that we would see a pro hero on standby with a smile on their face, as it would be revealed to be Cementos, and we would then see the man's pretty much staring at Izuku thinking that he's gonna make for an incredible rescue hero. And so, Izuku grabbing Uraraka and holding her like a damsel in distress would lead her towards a different building where he would ask, "Are you okay?" She would look at him and say, "I think I twisted my ankle." And it's at this point that Izuku, looking at Uraraka, would start coughing, with his body returning to his normal state, and her saying, "Freckle boy!" As Izuku, gasping and out of breath, would look at her and say, "Hey, nice to see you again." This is when he would help her up, saying, "Here, look, I'll take you to Recovery Girl." As he would take her closer, and she would just be like, "Thanks so much for your help back there." It's at this point that Izuku would be like, "Oh, don't mention it. I mean, isn't that what heroes are for? To save others?" As Uraraka would smile and be all like, "Right," in that classic anime fashion. As we would then see Izuku leaving the proctor area, and he would then go home like super nervous and be like, "Oh, like, did I pass the test? Did I pass the test?" Because even though the dude has the power to actually now be over here with Class 1A and future heroes and stuff like that, he's still, in his own lack of self-confidence, doesn't believe that he belongs. He kind of has like imposter syndrome, just due to the fact that he was a late bloomer, and it's not like he's inheriting the power of One for All, which makes him automatically think that he has to become something great. Instead, he's looking at himself as a baseline quirk at what he is, so he's doubting himself. And things are going to be like this for a little bit, just because we still want him to have like that little Okarun kind of personality. Oh, and in case you guys haven't noticed, Uraraka's kind of going to be playing like an ISA type of character for him, not in the sense of her powers or anything like that, but more so as a love interest type character. So with that said, let's move on. After this would happen, Izuku would return back home, and I could see him pretty much just training the entire time. Him trying to get to that same level of speed that he had reached when he had saved the Araka, because to him, he didn't do well enough regardless of how he did during the test, and he wants to show that he's better than even what he had shown previously, still having that sort of imposter syndrome thing going on. So with that said, by the time that he would get his acceptance letter and actually be allowed into UA, Izuku's new top speed would now be, what was it, 72 miles per hour, 73 miles per hour, one of the two, right? Which means that now he's a lot more faster, but at the end of the day, he's still not going to be some busted OP character, which is ultimately going to matter just because now Izuku's finally going to get into his first day of UA, which comes with the quirk apprehension test, which is kind of going to be giving us like a baseline level of how strong Izuku actually is. And this would all start off with an Izuku being dropped off at school and Inko kind of yelling out the window, "Bye baby, I love you, have a good day at school," with Izuku turning back and waving at her, and some like third-year girls kind of like staring at him and like laughing, be like, "Oh, look at that little mama's boy." Izuku would feel like a little red in the face, but you know, trying to get over this, Izuku would turn into his little like turbo mode and just walk by, like acting kind of chill and suave and stuff. As he makes his way to the door, Izuku would turn the power off and step inside, only to be greeted to Bakugo, who would stare right back at him, as the two of them would have a bit of a flashback moment to that scene in the anime that most of you guys probably don't remember, but that happens directly after each of them get accepted to UA. The school principal of their middle school kind of like tells them to come to school, and they both get like their pictures taken and all that stuff, and the principal's like, "I'm so proud of you two," you know what I mean? And then we have that scene where Bakugo tries to press Deku. I can see in this timeline Bakugo pushing Deku against the wall and then turning to him and saying, "Tell me the truth, you damn nerd. How did you manage to get into UA? Did you cheat? Huh? Tell me, you damn nerd." This is when Izuku would turn back towards Bakugo, and looking up at him this time, finally standing up to him for the first time, he would activate his quirk saying, "You know, man, I don't really know what your deal is, but if you're trying to have a fight, I really don't mind giving you one." He'd then crack his neck as Bakugo would try to throw an explosion at him, but before Bakugo could realize it, Izuku would be behind him, with Bakugo staring at him going, "What the? When did you get a damn quirk, you loser?" As Deku would stare back at him and tell him that he recently awakened it, and that he truly just was a late bloomer this whole time. Bakugo would suddenly smirk as he would turn to Deku and say, "Well, quirk or no quirk, I'm still gonna show the world that you're just useless Izuku." As Izuku would stare at him and say, "That a threat?" with Bakugo saying, "Nah, that's a promise, you loser. Now out of my way before I blow you up." As he would walk right past him, and he would think to himself, "Now I get to crush him at his best. I can't wait." This is when we would flash back to Deku and Bakugo, as each of them would stare at each other, with the normal persona of Deku kind of looking down in fear, but his alter ego, which is that turbo mode, would kind of just tell him to like look away and just go sit down. It's at this point that someone would bump into him, and it would be Uraraka. She'd say, "Freckle boy," as Izuku would turn around thinking, "I know that voice." It's at this point that he would see Uraraka, and the two of them would have not even a brief interaction before Aizawa would cut them off saying, "Hey, everybody put these on and meet me outside." It's at this point that he would start to pretty much tell them the rules about the quirk apprehension test, and Bakugo would be the one given the ball. After he would display what it's like to use their quirks during this test, Aizawa would then go on to tell them that whoever gets last place, well, they're gonna fail. And so we would have all of the tests beginning, starting with the 50-meter dash, which Deku would do extremely well on, considering the fact that Deku's quirk is pretty insane when you think about the actual implications. His ability allows him to move at top speed off rip, so not like an engine quirk like Ida that has to kind of get into different gears and go faster as he progresses like a car. Deku's able to just always go 73 miles per hour and push himself even a little further than that for this test. So he would ultimately end up getting a grand score of possibly 1 second or 2 seconds. I'm not really too sure what that would do in the 50-meter dash, like mathematically speaking, but regardless, he would get the best score there. Then for the grip strength test, because this turbo mode would actually give him increased like strength, Deku would get a very, very good marking on that. Then the standing long jump, because of Deku's like incredible speed, I think he'd probably be able to like run and then like jump. Oh no, it's a standing long jump. So he'd probably like get like maybe the same score that he got in the original, if not better. I'm not sure if Okuron has a crazy leaping ability, because like I just finished season 1 and the first 2 episodes that just came out of it of season 2, which, speaking of, quick tangent, who do you guys think is going to win in that Okuron versus Gigi fight? I am so hyped for episode 3. It's actually insane, but I need to stop going on tangent. Sorry. Okay. After that, we would get the repeated side to side steps, which I think he'd do well just because of the nature of his quirk, the ball throw, which he would do very mediocre on. And then we would have the last 3 tests, which would probably be push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups, which he would do pretty decent on. Which, during this time, I could probably see the class noticing that Deku's personality greatly changes whenever he uses this power of his. And this would be something that Aizawa, as well as the people around him, would take note of. This would ultimately lead Izuku to getting pretty great scores and not being at the bottom at all. And this would even shock Bakugo, because even though Izuku hadn't done better than he had, he was stunned that their scores could even be comparable, which would piss him off. Somebody who's had a quirk way longer than Izuku should not even be in the same conversation as him, which would probably end up giving us a scene of Bakugo angrily trying to like press Deku, with Aizawa stopping him, telling him that if he tries that again, he will be expelled. This is when we would jump into the very next day of UA, which would be the battle trial arc, and I could see it all kind of beginning like a normal day. Everybody kind of getting accustomed to themselves, Deku, Uraraka, and Ida all in the same friend group, with Ida and Deku bonding over the fact that they're both kind of speed types. This would lead Ida and Izuku to potentially having some sort of like agreement to do some sort of like after school training together, seeing as they would probably be very compatible when it comes to their training methods and stuff like that, and could probably spar or something like that. And this would lead Ida and Izuku to going home after school, deciding that they're gonna go do some training after, with the Uraraka being like, oh, that's so cool, I wish I could tag along, but I gotta go do some cooking after school. Izuku would then look at her and ask, what do you mean by that? And she would say, oh, well, I actually live alone. I live a couple of blocks away from the school in a small little apartment. Truth is, I'm kind of broke. Izuku would look at her and say, oh, really? Well, you don't really have to worry about that if you were to come over. My mom could just whip us something up. And so Uraraka, hearing that, would be like, what, really? She'd be like, oh, it's been so long since I've had a home-cooked meal. She'd be eating her own food that she's having of like a pro chef, and she's like, well, sign me up. As we would then get Izuku, Ida, and Uraraka like agreeing all to hang out after school, all the while Bakugo would be staring at Deku, just like eating his food angrily, just kind of like, you know, like just looking at him all angrily like a bully. As we would then get the battle trial arc starting, All Might would bust through the door and be like, I am here, as he would go on to be greeted by all the students, and they're all just like, All Might, ah! Like they're all freaking out, as we would then get a scene of All Might pretty much telling them about their costumes and the ins and outs of the training that they're gonna do. This would lead to the teams all being decided, and interestingly enough, Deku, Uraraka, and Ida would all be placed in the same event, as Ida would walk over towards Izuku and tell him no hard feelings of regardless of how this goes, and Izuku would just stare at Ida saying, of course, man, as we would get the both of them kind of dapping up, and Bakugo walking past Deku and kind of just shoulder checking him. It's at this point that Deku, turning at Bakugo, would kind of just ignore him, with his alter ego telling him just ignore it. This is when we would then get a scene of Izuku and Uraraka talking about things, with her asking Izuku what that dude's deal is. He would go on to tell her that he used to bully him a while ago, and that he's pretty much after his guts to show that he doesn't belong at UA. But Izuku would stare at her, now turning on his ability, as he would say, but now things are different, and there's no way that I'm going to be letting Bakugo beat me, even if I have to break every bone in my body to do so. As we would see Uraraka staring at Deku, just thinking, whoa, he's intense. It's at this point that we would have everything begin, and Bakugo, being who he is, would try to rush Deku immediately, as he would try to catch Izuku off guard by turning the corner and shooting an explosion directly in his face, but luckily for Izuku, because he's already using his turbo mode, he would be able to perceive it just fast enough to dodge out of the way of the explosion and leap from wall to wall before rushing at Bakugo, trying to hit him with a headbutt. Bakugo, being hit by this, would think, what the hell, as he would be sent into the wall, and he would stare at Izuku, blowing an explosion in his face. This would deal damage to him and send him flying back, as Izuku would yell out, Uraraka, find the bomb room and I'll get to you later, as Bakugo would stand back up and turn to him saying, you're not going to be going to her anytime soon, because I'm going to make sure that there's little bits of Izuku blown here, there, and there. This would lead All Might, who's hearing this whole thing in the background, to be like, whoa, he's very much acting like a villain, as we would then see Izuku leaping out of the direction of one of his explosions, which Bakugo would continue trying to hit him with. But ultimately it wouldn't work, and this would piss him off, probably leading him to using his gauntlets on Izuku and leading to a massive explosion in the corridor, which Izuku, luckily due to his speed, would be able to outrun, since Bakugo hadn't fully trapped him in a corner with a dead end. So Izuku was able to outrun the speed of the blast, being hit by a minimal amount of it, as Bakugo would walk through the smoke, questioning if Izuku's even alive in there, as we would then see Izuku charging up an attack and rushing at Bakugo full speed before throwing a punch directly at his face. This would send Bakugo crashing into the wall as he would stare up at Izuku angrily and holding up his other arm that point blank in Deku's face. He would pull the pin. It's at this point that Deku, being point blank in the range of it and being stuck midair, not being able to run away, would be about to be hit by the explosion. The charge would be about to go off when suddenly, boom, the gauntlet itself would shatter, with All Might having rushed onto the scene and stopping anything before it could have gotten too serious. It's at this point that Izuku, on the ground having snapped out of his power, would be breathing heavy, staring at Bakugo just thinking, he tried to kill me. And Bakugo would look at Izuku with nothing but rage in his eyes. All Might would stare at Bakugo as he would grab him by his collar and say, young man, do you understand what you just tried to do to your classmate? Come with me. We're going to the principal's office. I'm very disappointed in you. We would then see Bakugo walking behind All Might as he would say, whatever, I'm coming. As we would then get a scene of him talking with Principal Nezu, and him essentially being told that if he ever does that again, he's gonna be expelled. Nezu would say that in a very happy way, with Bakugo being like, why are you talking about my expulsion as if it's a good thing? As Nezu would look at him and say, look Bakugo, I'm going to be frank with you. As a hero you have potential, if only because of your quirk, but your personality and the way that you like to go about things isn't very heroic. You're kind of like Endeavor in the hot-headedness, but even his work is efficient and he never takes things too far with villains. Well, at least most times. Bakugo hearing this would say, yeah, and what of it? I'm still gonna be a great hero. He would tell him, I know you looked up to All Might your whole life, and what you just tried to do back there to your classmate is not something All Might would do. Please, Bakugo, consider refraining from using your quirk in such destructive manners in the future, because otherwise I'll have no choice but to expel you, and you'll have to find a different hero academia. Bakugo hearing this would kind of just go, fine. I guess I'll go apologize to the twerp. As we would then get Izuku thinking about everything that had just happened, and we would most likely get a scene of Bakugo trying to go up to Deku and maybe give him like some sort of half-assed apology, but before he could even say anything, Deku would just walk past him like just still stunned at the fact that Bakugo would try to hurt him that badly. Him being pissed, but mostly shocked. He never expected that out of Bakugo, even with all the stuff that he's pulled on him over the years. So, as Deku, Uraraka, and Ida would make their way to his place, we would get a scene of them all kind of just having a good day, with them talking about Bakugo and how horrible it was what they did. Or he did, sorry. But it's at this point that we would get a knock at the door, and it would be Mitsuki and Bakugo, with Inkos turning to Izuku and saying, hey Izuku, I hope you don't mind that I invited Mitsuki over. I assume that if you're going to be inviting your friends, Bakugo should come along, right? I mean, isn't he part of your high school now? As Izuku's staring at Bakugo, we would see him like just looking at him with a glare, and Bakugo realizing that Deku's like he's never looked at him like that before. It pisses him off, but at the same time, he understands why he's feeling like this. But ultimately, Bakugo just walks inside, just kind of like, as we'd get like a very awkward atmosphere, which Mitsuki would quickly snap out. She'd say, hey, you damn brat, did you do something against Izuku? I've never seen him look at you like this, so tell me the truth. Bakugo would then look at her and say, yeah, whatever. Guess I might have taken things too far during combat sparring earlier. And now he's pissed because he thinks I tried to kill him. It's at this point that Ida would stand up out of his seat and say, tried? Bakugo, you tried to launch a full-powered explosion in your classmate's face that could have easily destroyed all of his facial features, prohibited him from becoming a hero, and gotten you expelled from the hero course. We were only lucky that All Might was there to stop everything. As Mitsuki hearing this would say, that right. She'd grab Bakugo by the hair and say, I need you to bow down to the floor and apologize. And we'd get a scene of Bakugo literally on the floor apologizing to Deku, as she would beat him up the entire way home, and she would also apologize to Inko for that. She would turn to Izuku saying, Izuku, why didn't you tell me all this? With Izuku saying, honestly, I just didn't want you to worry. She would smile saying, but Izuku, It's my job to worry. As he would then look at his mother and apologize for not having spoken earlier. This is when we would then get the rest of them having a nice little dinner, and the very next day, Bakugo would walk over towards Izuku with Mitsuki in her car, watching him go over to him and apologize. As he would bow down and say, "I'm sorry, you damn Deku. I let my anger get the best of me. I promise and I swear that it's never gonna happen again, alright? But don't get it twisted. The next time we fight, I will be the one that's wiping the floor with you. You might even be half dead by the time the battle's done, but I promise this, Deku, you'll still be alive." Izuku, hearing that and seeing Bakugo walk away, would realize that that was actually kind of a genuine apology. He would think that maybe he doesn't have to hold a grudge, but then he remembers Bakugo literally trying to kill him and he's like, yeah, nah, he tried straight up kill me. So we would get all the students returning back to class and everything kind of going to normal classroom studies until eventually Aizawa would say, "Alright, listen up, pretty soon we're going to be having a USJ event. You guys are going to be practicing how to do rescue training. So I need you guys to take these home to your parents and get these permission slips signed before Wednesday. Is that understood?" Everybody would look at Aizawa and be like nodding their heads as he would just kind of nod at them and then pass back out in his little sleeping bag. It's at this point that they would start their English class with Present Mike, and then we would get all the students getting their permission slip signed and all being ready for the USJ arc. And before I begin this arc, I just quickly have to say, sorry if you guys end up hearing some background noise from this point forward. It's just that before I was recording when my family wasn't home, but they just got here and they're about to eat, so it's probably going to be a little bit loud. I doubt you guys will hear them, but in case some sounds do slip through and I'm not able to edit them out, you guys know why. Anyways, we begin the arc with the students all on the bus making their way to the USJ, with some talks about who the strongest in the class is and who has some of the coolest quirks. Eventually the topic would come up of Izuku's strange quirk and how his changes his appearance, and Mina would ask, "Hey, so are you a mutant too?" As Deku would look at her and say, "Honestly, I don't really know. I mean, I just awakened my quirk a couple of months ago, so all the ins and outs are kind of hazy if I'm being honest." Upon hearing this, Bakugo would stare at Izuku and think, "I guess the runt really wasn't lying. He really was a late bloomer. How pathetic." It's at this point that he would kind of just stare out the window, and we would then get all of the students making their way to the USJ, with the students who actually get teleported out to different sections changing a bit. Because in this timeline, instead of Ida pretty much being the one to run and get All Might, I figured that with Izuku completely unable to do anything against Nomu in this timeline, it'd be kind of funny if Izuku was the one to go get All Might. So that's the direction we're going to be going with. And as soon as Ida and the rest of the students would be teleported to different sections, Izuku, now standing there in his new Okarun form, he would look up towards Kurogiri thinking, "Man, what a drag." As he would be told by Zawa or 13 or maybe even the students that he needs to get out of here and go call for backup. That with only them there, things could get extremely dangerous. So Izuku, taking one last glance at his classmates, would think, "Alright, fine," as this is when he would rush towards the direction of the UA door and Kurogiri would try to stop him. But using speed even greater than Ida's, he'd be able to use that to run right by him and begin making his way towards All Might. It's at this point that Izuku would try using his phone to contact the heroes, but he would realize that his signal was still kind of jammed for some reason. And the frustration and desire for Izuku to make his way to UA even faster would actually drive his body to kind of like manifesting itself and running through the telephone wires. This is when Izuku would practically instantly teleport straight to UA via the telephone wires, as we would see Izuku pop right out and beginning to breathe in and out since he wasn't able to breathe while he was in that form. Izuku would now be in front of UA, and after catching his breath for like 2 seconds, he would run inside going, "Principal Nezu, we need All Might to come to the USJ immediately." As Izuku would spot the small All Might form buffing up, with him looking at Izuku and saying, "We'll talk later, young man," he would then jump off, with Izuku thinking, "I've got to go back." And it'd be at this point that the image of Uraraka would appear in his head, with a slight blush coming over and him thinking, why am I thinking about her?" As she's traveling through the telephone wire. He would arrive outside of the USJ and rush inside through the opening in the door that they had created before. This is when Izuku, arriving there just a little after All Might, would walk into seeing the same sights that he would have caught in the original, as Izuku would notice that while everybody was struggling, there were two people that were struggling the most: Aizawa, who's currently facing the Nomu, and Ida, Tsuyu, and Mineta, who were on top of the boat. Izuku, noticing that his classmates needed his help, would rush to their aid, as grabbing some of the gadgets that would be a part of his hero costume, he would then grab these high voltage things that Izuku had thought of fighting with and throw them in the lake, with the devices short-circuiting and causing all of the villains inside to be hit by the conductive water. As he would stare at Ida, who would nod back at him, and Tsuyu would just come out being like, "Ribbit," all the while Mineta starts throwing his balls like crazy, being like, "Die! Like, leave us alone!" As we would then get greeted to Izuku running back to the direction of the students, primarily near Araka, with him on watching the battle between All Might and the Nomu, just thinking about how insanely powerful that creature was. And can we just stop for a moment and talk about the scaling? All Might in this fight, I think, might have genuinely struggled more than he did when he was facing off against All For One, which is insane, because once you get to season 7 of the anime, Nomus that are way more powerful than even this version of Nomu are actively getting destroyed by characters that should be way weaker than All Might, but I digress. Point being, with the USJ ending in this fashion, similarly to how it does in the original, we kind of don't have really much to cover, and so we're able to just kind of skip straight on over to the sports festival arc, where you would think that Izuku's gonna go crazy during most of the events, but it's actually kind of a bit disappointing, because remember, Okuron's powers don't exactly translate too crazily into the My Hero Academia world, where if I'm being real, Reciprocal Burst Ida at this point could probably take on Izuku's speed, so that's probably what we would end up seeing. Izuku's only event that he would probably like do astounding in would most likely be the obstacle race, which only really consists of him running, so he does extremely well, and he would most likely actually end up getting first place. Then he would probably do the cavalry battle, and depending on whether you think he could pass or not without One For All in this timeline, that would kind of determine whether he would stop here or even make it forward. But assuming he can make it past the cavalry battle with his quirk in this timeline, he's gonna find himself up against Hitoshi Shinso, and Izuku, even in his little nonchalant form, I could still see him answering Shinso back. So one Shinso would get him in his mind control without Izuku having access to something like One For All. There's just no way that he was going to be able to escape Shinso's mind control, and he would ultimately end up defeating Izuku, which meant that Shinso would probably advance a bit further. But apart from that, the only other change would pretty much be that Bakugo would not be the winner, because without Izuku's speech to Todoroki, I don't see him being off of his game, and because the only reason that I personally think Bakugo won the sports festival was because Todoroki wasn't going all out, I'm gonna be saying that Todoroki's the one to actually get first place in this timeline, which kind of does affect the stuff that happens during the sports festival, which probably just amounts to Izuku and Uraraka having a conversation and her telling Izuku to just train even harder, that the next time that he participates in their second year, he's gonna blow everyone's socks away with his speed. And Izuku would kind of just like nod at her and be like, "You're right, Uraraka," as we'd get like this really cute little scene of the two of them like inadvertently kind of like flirting and hyping each other up. But other than that, I don't really see too much changing during the UA Sports Festival, which is really interesting because once you start getting into Izuku having this kind of quirk, he kind of just starts to blend in the background like an Ida type character. And I know at the start of the story, I was like, oh, we should give him One For All to make him even more powerful. But I'm just like, nah, like let me just enjoy Okuron's like powers and character for what it is. And finally cover a story where Izuku's able to just be a straight up side character with a pretty strong quirk. Which at this point, I just have to ask, what quirk would you guys rather have? The Turbo quirk, which doesn't come with the caveat of you losing your balls, or Denki Kaminari's quirk, which comes with lightning bolts and stuff like that? Genuine question, which one would you rather have? Mind you, Okuron's quirk also comes with the ability of traveling through like telephone wires, and he's going to be having that astral projection power in a little bit, but other than that, that's really all there is to him. And that's going to matter a lot considering the arc that's about to come up, which is the internship arc, where it's all about how flashy your quirk can be to determine who even wants you as a sidekick or wants you to intern with them. And because of Deku's not being the One For All, successor that he would be in the original, he wouldn't even be trained by Gran Torino, who possibly would most likely end up making for the best mentor, especially for this turbo quirk that he has. So with that being the case, I could see him maybe getting an internship from a pro hero who has a speed-based quirk or something like that. Someone who's kind of like Ingenia, maybe a little slower, who wants to show Deku the ropes and, kind of be like a big brother mentor to Deku. So instead of him facing off against Stain or doing all the Hosu training or learning for Cowling, the dude literally just goes on your everyday run-of-the-mill manual type internship, which is kind of similar to the one that Ida goes on, but more for revenge. So Izuku literally internships with a background character that probably doesn't even have like a full-on hero design, and once he returns back to school for the rescue training race, which is that little event that happened where they had to rescue All Might to showcase what they've learned, Deku would probably be a lot more fast here, going and reaching a top speeds of what, 90 miles an hour, which is pretty fast, but still cars are even faster than Deku at this point, which is kind of crazy. So with that being said, Deku does very well here, but other than that, he kind of just starts to more and more so start blending into the background and falling into that Ida tier character, which I know I keep mentioning, but it's just so hilarious to me how unbelievably underwhelming Okarun's speed is in regards to like how cool it looks in the actual anime itself. So with that being said, we'd probably get the final exams arc coming up, and because Izuku's not the successor of One for All, he probably wouldn't end up facing off against All Might, which is a really good thing because this means he won't be paired up with Bakugo in this timeline. So maybe instead we could have him be paired up with like Mineta, or no, probably not that. I don't know, who in the world would he face off against, because the options for the teachers are a little limited. Maybe we could have him go up against Ectoplasm and somebody like Tokiyami could replace him, but that just doesn't make sense. I feel like the two strongest students should face off the strongest teacher, so maybe we could replace him and Todoroki and swap their places, and now we kind of have like Momo and Deku versus Aizawa, which, if I'm being honest, I'm not sure Izuku could actually pull this off. However, because he does have Momo, we know that the teachers aren't going all out, and Momo's probably able to create something really cool for them. Maybe we could have like oh, you know what would be a super sick idea for them to win? Where Momo creates like a bunch of tear gas, like an absurd amount of it, and Deku, using his quirk, runs into the battlefield and just throws it straight in the direction of Aizawa, which causes him to like not be able to keep his eyes wide open. So Deku's able to blitz around the battlefield and rush him and kind of like restrain him in like his scarf. All the while Momo creates like a little cannon that shoots something at him and knocks him out. That'd be kind of cool and honestly a little realistic for the event. So let's go with that and say that they win. And on the flip side, Bakugo and Todoroki would not be able to work together properly, mostly due to Bakugo, which would probably lead to All Might just destroying them, and Todoroki like trying to do his best not to lose to show his dad how much better he is than him and all that stuff, but it ultimately wouldn't work because he's facing off against the symbol of peace. And then we would end up getting the next arc, which would be the Forest Training Camp arc, which unironically could genuinely be where Izuku's story ends. Just because Muscular is so strong that I just don't see a world where any of Izuku's attacks even manage to make a dent in Muscular's like muscle fibers. And if he manages to even land one hit on Muscular, Izuku's literally dead. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Starting the whole thing off, we would get that whole scene with Pixie Bob and her monsters and all that stuff, with Class 1A making their way through the forest, and then the whole hilarious Coda section of the story, with him like punching Deku in the nuts for literally no reason, and like him pretty much end up stopping Mineta from making his way to the girls' bathhouse section, him being like, rules are meant to be broken, as we would then get a clip of like everybody just kind of doing their normal training, and Izuku working on increasing his speed being the primary function of his quirk, as well as possibly working with Aizawa to maybe start practicing how to use his scarf, just because with Izuku's incredible speed, his capture prowess on the battlefield is going to be something to actually take note of, especially for villains that Izuku's going to be able to outpace but not exactly injure too much, which is the exact scenario Izuku's going to find himself in. Oh, and spoiler alert, I'm not going to kill Izuku because we're only like what, 45 minutes into the story, and it'd be a real shame if I cut it off here. So I'm thinking the Muscular situation is going to go down something like this. Izuku, still being who he is probably going to go check up on Coda and then run into Muscular, which then would lead Izuku to like probably trying to attack him and possibly dropping some sort of weak one-liner along the lines of, I'm not going to let you hurt this kid, as he would then punch Muscular square in the face, but his muscle fibers would have gone in the way at the last moment and Izuku would realize it did nothing. Then Muscular could potentially punch Izuku, leading him to having having like a broken rib or like an arm or something like that, to which Deku being sent flying would then have Muscular come and jump on him, trying to like straight up Hulk smash him into the dirt and kill him with one blow. But Deku, using his superior speed, would grab Koda and run into the forest, realizing that his best possible option now is probably to run away, because his job as a hero is to save lives, not to get into death matches. So, saving Koda and rushing into the forest, the two of them would hide, with Muscular destroying tree after tree, saying, "Where are you?" as he'd be looking for the two of them, but he would grab Koda and signal to him to stay quiet. It's at this point that Muscular, getting closer and closer, would then force Izuku to grabbing onto his rib and arm and holding Koda on top of his back as he would rush right by Muscular, who starts to try to chase after Izuku, but realizing that he's so much faster would probably be like, "Guess the damn coward's not interested in a full-on deathmatch. Oh, this is why I hate speed types," as he would sit there and continue searching for his objective, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku, now being with Aizawa and realizing that his abilities are now super limited due to what had happened with Muscular, he would probably rush in to try to see how many students he could save and bring back to the actual like UA, like dormitory or the teacher section, where they're all sleeping, like the little building that they're all at, is what I'm trying to get at. And rushing through the air fighting zone, he would end up discovering Tokiyami as well as Shoji, who both of them in the forest trying to restrain Tokiyami's quirk. Izuku, taking note of this, would rush back to where the classroom was at, grabbing like a lighter or like a flamethrower or something like that. No, a flashlight, that's perfect, a literal flashlight, and just aiming it at Tokiyami, but it would be like the brightest flashlight that they have, and it floodlights the entire area, forcing Tokiyami to be able to control Dark Shadow once again, as they're able to go through the forest, and they use Tokiyami's quirk to actually face off against anything that they can't fight. So they eventually run into Moonfish, like the villain with like the teeth and stuff like that, and Tokiyami's able to use his insane quirk in tandem with Izuku and his flashlight to like destroy the villains, and then Izuku just shoots his flashlight at Tokiyami, so he's able to control it. And this would be the case with everything until eventually Tokiyami and Bakugo would get kidnapped, much like they do in the original. I could even actually see Muscular fighting off against them before they even encounter Uraraka and Tsuyu, who are currently like facing off against Toga. So maybe even Muscular would get taken down by Dark Shadow's like Ragnarok stake, which would be insane. And so we're able to kind of just get into the situation where Bakugo gets kidnapped and Tokiyami is barely saved, as we would get a scene of possibly Deku using his superior speed, since this time he's not as nerfed as he was in the original, and rushing in, barely making it into the portal, as Izuku would hit the ground with a thud and all of the villains would instantly stare at him. Izuku would look up, with Tomura going, "Would you look at that? It looks like a little hero decided he wanted to join the party. Kurogiri, clean up his remains." Shigaraki would be about to touch Izuku, with Izuku looking around in the room wondering if there's any way he could escape this, and as the hand got closer and closer, suddenly a TV would come on, with All For One saying, "Tomura, spare the child. There might be use for him yet." As Shigaraki, turning to the TV, would say, "Master, are you sure about this? I might as well just kill the brat. I can't see a single reason why we'd even need him here." As we would then have All For One reassuring Shigaraki of the fact that he could be useful, and we would then have him be gagged and like chained up next to Bakugo. It's at this point that the two of them sitting there would both be wondering what the heck they're gonna do now, with Bakugo staring at Izuku and just giving him a stare of, "The hell did you come here with me for?" And Izuku just kind of like talking with him through his eyes, being like, "I couldn't just let you go," as Bakugo and Deku would both like be talking internally, like both just kind of giving each other looks and understanding what the other means, as we could probably either get two things happening. Option A, the heroes arrive and end up saving Deku and Bakugo, which is the most like obvious answer, or option B, Deku would actually be teleported to All For One and probably be like given a quirk or turned into a Nomu or something like that, which is a story direction that we could go down. But I just don't know about that one because I haven't had enough time to really think about that path, and it just came into my head like as a last second thing. So I think honestly we're going to be going with the other option where it's like All Might would arrive, and with All Might arriving, I could maybe see like when the heroes get there, Deku would pretty much end up using his quirk to super speed their way out of there, as we would then get the original fight between All Might and All For One, and that entire arc would end with Izuku luckily making it out of there alive alongside Bakugo. With the both of them finally able to talk to each other, Bakugo would say, "You're such an idiot, Deku. Why in the world did you have to join me and almost get yourself killed? I just finished apologizing to you for almost killing you, and now you nearly did that over what? Saving me? You know I would have been fine." Deku then turns towards Bakugo and says, "Whatever, Bakugo." As they're both rushing away, Bakugo now off of Deku be like, "Get off of me!" As he'd start, using his explosion quirk to create distance. This is when the two of them would watch the battle between All Might and All for One, and in awe, the two of them would watch as the greatest hero the world's ever known would defeat All for One and stand on top victoriously. After this, we would then get the beginnings of the overhaul arc, as this is where things would start to change drastically, because due to the fact that Izuku's not the inheritor of One for All, he probably would never even end up going with Mirio for the internship with Tsunade, which means that his involvement in the overhaul arc would be completely nullified. But if you're wondering how it would go, it would probably still be successful, because this time Mirio would be the inheritor of One for All, which means that he'd be able to put in that work and most likely save Eri during his first encounter with the villain during the alleyway, which would be kind of a sick change in the story. But yeah, Izuku would probably be left to play some sort of background character role again, and would most likely go intern with, I don't know, some random other top 50 pro hero who we don't really know anything about, but probably still has the speed quirk. No, he'd probably end up going with the same guy that he went with last time, because there's no reason he wouldn't. The only reason he doesn't return with Gran Torino in the anime is because the dude had his license suspended and he was busy with other stuff. So this actually works out perfect. And so we're able to just jump straight into the UA School Festival arc, which is where Deku could actually finally have one battle against another villain, which might actually be like the coolest and like best part of the story, and ironically, which ends up being Izuku versus Gentle Criminal and La Brava. We would start the day off with Izuku and his classmates all getting ready for the festival, with Izuku meeting Eri and being like, "Whoa, she's so adorable." He'd probably still be like, "Oh, like she's so cute." He'd make her a candy apple, and then he'd be super excited to put on a great show for her specifically and everybody in UA who needs their spirits lifted, especially with everything that's been going on with the League of Villains lately. And so we would end up getting Deku that same day realizing that the rope that they need to use is kind of worn out, and we would get him rushing to the store as fast as possible and bumping into Gentle Criminal. Deku, seeing them, would recognize him from the online videos that he would post, and he would then stop him, going into his Turbo Granny mode, as staring to the direction of Gentle Criminal, he would say, "So, you intending on stopping the school festival or what?" As Gentle would stop in his tracks and say, "So, it appears that a hero student has caught a whiff of my true intentions." He would tell him, "My name is Gentle, and with this act of defiance, I will go down in the history books as somebody." With Izuku hearing this going, "Huh? What do you mean somebody?" Regardless though, he would then lunge to the direction of Gentle, with Gentle being stunned at his speed and creating like the elastic effect in front of Izuku. Izuku bumping into it would then be sent flying to the ground, as he would think, "What?" This is when Izuku would try to rush in at Gentle Criminal over and over again. He would proceed to use that same move to prevent Izuku to even land a single attack. And with this realization, Izuku would start to understand that there's nothing he could actually do to Gentle. So, looking down at his phone, he would wonder whether he should just tell the school Gentle's coming, realizing that he couldn't handle him. But it would be in this moment that Izuku would have a flashback of all the times that all he's done with his quirk that he's unlocked and has been wanting his whole life has been running away. Izuku would crush his phone, looking up and going, "Nah, I'm not giving up. I'm gonna take him down." And it's at this point that he would rush to the direction of Gentle Criminal, bouncing off of the elastic things that he's creating and using Gentle's own quirk against him. Picking up speed, Izuku would lunge towards Gentle Criminal as fast as possible and land a gut punch straight to the criminal's stomach, sending him into the air. Gentle would soften the air up, as he would then ricochet right back towards Izuku, about to use his quirk to take Izuku out. However, spinning mid-air, Izuku would proceed to shoot himself into the telephone wires, shooting himself back out, stunning Gentle, who would not expect this, having been amped by his La Brava love quirk, as Izuku coming in would end up absolutely decimating Gentle, slamming an elbow into his back, with Gentle Criminal being knocked unconscious and him being unable to move, his back having been been so severely injured that even getting up would have caused him severe pain. It's not shattered, but it's very, very hurt. I don't know if you guys have ever had like such a bad like day where you had so much pain in your back that you genuinely felt like you couldn't move, but that's what's going on with Izuku in this moment. And this was definitely, Gento in this moment, and this was affecting him. So Izuku would successfully stop Gento Criminal, and funny enough, Izuku's pro hero career is gonna consist of him being Gento Criminal level for his whole life. Maybe even one day being like Ida level, like at his peak after the work and stuff like that, but that's it. Like I can't even like amp Turbo Granny up that much because we don't even know like how much crazier the actual story gets. But if you're like a crazy Dandadan fan and you realizing like, hey Xehther, you got this wrong, this is how this should work and this is how this should work, let me know because I'd be super interested to find out how much stronger Okarun actually gets in the Dandadan anime. But ladies and gentlemen, that's where I'm going to be wrapping this video up, just because the remainder of the story doesn't really consist of too many villains, just because the last arc isn't really about Izuku, it's more about Mirio versus Shigaraki once he becomes like awakened and stuff, and with Mirio's ability to become intangible, he's kind of the worst opponent for Shigaraki, so he's able to defeat him, which is a good thing, and we're able to kind of just jump into Izuku becoming a pro hero in the future and going on to form his own legacy, his agency, and forming friendships, and probably marrying Araka, which is definitely what would happen, and all this other cool stuff, which is pretty interesting to cover, and he'd maybe even fight alongside Araka against Toga, which could make for like a really cool like final war arc fight, but other than that, that's really all that really changes in the story. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let me know down below in the comments if you guys enjoyed this one, and let me know what you guys are going to be wanting to see in the future. But with that being said, it has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace!
I am here, thanking you for making it to the end of the video. Remember to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with a friend, and stay plus ultra!